Stop what you're doing and listen carefully. If you've been waking up between 3 and 5 in the morning, your soul is trying to tell you something that your conscious mind refuses to hear. Carl Jung spent decades studying this phenomenon, and what he discovered will change everything you think you know about sleep, about yourself, about why you can't rest. These aren't random wake ups. They're not insomnia. They're not anxiety. Acting up, your unconscious mind is screaming at you during the hours when your ego finally shuts down, when your defenses are asleep, when the truth you've been running from all day can finally break through. And it's choosing these specific hours for a very specific reason. Jung called this the hour of the wolf, the time when the veil between your conscious and unconscious mind is thinnest, when your shadow, the parts of yourself you've rejected, denied, buried, comes knocking, demanding to be seen. And it won't stop until you listen between 3 and 5 a.m. Your body is in its deepest sleep cycle. Your logical mind is offline. Your ability to lie to yourself is gone. And that's exactly when your psyche does its most important work. It processes what you've been avoiding. It brings up what you've been suppressing. It forces you to face what you pretend isn't there during the day. And if you keep ignoring it, if you keep rolling over and trying to force yourself back to sleep, if you keep chalking it up to stress or bad sleep hygiene, you're missing the most important message your unconscious will ever send you. Because Jung discovered something that most people never understand. These early morning wake-ups aren't happening to you, they're happening for you. Your psyche is trying to birth something new, a new version of you, a truth. You're ready to face a change you need to make, but your ego, your daytime self, is too scared, too defended, too invested in the current reality to allow it. So your unconscious waits until 3 a.m. when your ego is asleep and asleep. Then it wakes you up and says, we need to talk right now. And what it needs to tell you is so important, so urgent, so vital to your growth, that it's willing to destroy your sleep night after night until you finally stop running and start listening. Most people treat this like a problem to fix. They take melatonin, they try sleep hygiene, they see doctors, they do everything possible to stop the wake-ups. But Jung would tell you that's like putting duct tape over your check engine. Light. The warning isn't the problem. The warning is trying to save you from the problem. And the problem is this: there's something in your life right now that's out of alignment with your true self. There's a truth. You're not speaking a change. You're not making a part of yourself. You're not honoring a path you're supposed to be walking that you keep avoiding. And your unconscious knows it, and it's done. Being patient. These wake-ups are your psyche's last resort, its final attempt to get your attention before something breaks, before the misalignment becomes so severe that your life forces the change in ways you can't control. Jung saw this pattern over and over. People who ignored these messages from their unconscious would eventually face a crisis, a breakdown, a dark night of the soul that forced them to confront what they'd been avoiding. But it didn't have to be that way. The wake-ups were the early warning system, the gentle nudge before the cosmic shove. And those who learned to listen to, truly listen to, decode what their unconscious was saying in those pre-dawn hours, they were the ones who transformed gracefully, who made the necessary changes before life made them, who stepped into their authentic self without needing to be dragged there by catastrophe. So if you're waking between 3 and 5 a.m., your unconscious is trying to tell you something, and in the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what it's saying and exactly what you need to do about it, because Jung left us a map. He decoded this language. He understood what the psyche is communicating through these wake-ups. And once you understand it, once you know how to listen, everything changes. The wake-ups might not stop immediately, but their quality changes. They stop being torture and start being communion. They stop being something that happens to you and start being something you engage with. And eventually, when you've heard the message, when you've made the change, when you've honored what your unconscious was trying to tell you, the wake-ups stop on their own, not because you fixed your sleep, but because you fixed your life. Here's what's really happening in your brain and your psyche between 3 and 5 in the morning, and why Jung believed these hours were sacred between 3 and 5 a.m. Your body enters what's called the REM, rebound phase. This is when your brain is processing emotions, consolidating memories, and most importantly, integrating unconscious material. Your cortisol levels are at their lowest. Your logical prefrontal cortex, the part that rationalizes and defends and explains away, is barely functioning. And your limbic system, the emotional center, is highly active. This is the window when your unconscious has direct access to your awareness without your ego interfering. Jung understood that the psyche is always trying to move toward wholeness. It's always trying to integrate what's been split off, to bring into consciousness what's been repressed, to show you the parts of yourself you've disowned. And during the day, your ego is too strong, too defended, too busy managing your persona, the mask you show the world. But at 3 a.m., your persona drops, your defenses sleep, and your true self can finally speak. And what it speaks about is always the same thing. It shows you what's out of alignment. If you're in a relationship that's slowly killing your soul, you'll wake up at 3 a.m. with anxiety about it. If you're in a career that betrays your true calling, you'll wake up at 3 a.m. with dread about Monday. If you're living a lie pretending to be someone you're not, you'll wake up at 3 a.m. feeling like you can't breathe because your unconscious knows the truth, even when your conscious mind won't admit it. And it uses these hours to show you, to make you feel it, to force you to acknowledge what you spend all day denying. Jung called this the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to create a bridge between conscious and unconscious, between who you pretend to be and who you actually are. And that bridge is often built in the dark hours, when you can't run, when you can't distract, when you can't perform, when you're just you alone with yourself facing the truth. And for most people, that's terrifying, because the truth usually requires change. It requires letting go of something. It requires stepping into the unknown. It requires becoming someone new. And your ego hates that. Your ego wants safety, familiarity, the known world, even if the known world is making you miserable. So during the day, your ego wins. It keeps you in the prison. It convinces you that this is fine, that you're fine, that everything's fine. But at 3 a.m., your ego is asleep, and your soul finally gets a word in, and it says, this isn't fine. You're dying here. You need to change. And your body responds with cortisol, with adrenaline, with the feeling of panic or dread or nameless anxiety, because your unconscious is trying to activate you, trying to give you the energy to make the change you need to make. But without understanding what's happening, without Jung's framework for decoding it, you just experience it as insomnia, as a sleep problem, as something wrong with you, when actually it's something right with you. It's your psyche working exactly as it should, trying to save you from a life that doesn't fit, trying to push you toward your authentic self, trying to force the transformation you're resisting. And here's the specific thing Jung noticed about the 3 to 5 a.m. window. This is the time associated in traditional Chinese medicine with the lung meridian and the emotion of grief. Your unconscious often wakes you during these hours because there's something you need to grieve, something you need to let go of, something you need to release. Maybe it's the life you thought you'd have by now. Maybe it's the person you thought you'd become. Maybe it's the relationship you keep trying to save that died years ago. Maybe it's the dream you gave up on. Maybe it's the version of yourself you've been clinging to that no longer serves you. Whatever it is, your psyche knows it's time to let it go. And it's waking you up to process that grief, to feel that loss, to make space for what's trying to be born. But most people don't grieve. They distract, they suppress, they go back to sleep, they take the pill, they do anything to avoid feeling what needs to be felt. And so the wake-ups continue night after night, because the grief is still there. The thing that needs to be released is still being held, and your unconscious will keep bringing it up until you finally face it. Jung believed that what you don't deal with consciously, you'll be forced to deal with unconsciously, and these wake-ups are your unconscious dealing with it, trying to process what you won't process during the day, trying to integrate what you keep avoiding, trying to move you through the transition you're resisting. So the question isn't, how do I stop waking up? The question is, what is trying to die in my life that I won't let go of? What is my unconscious trying to grieve that I keep refusing to feel? And when you ask that question, when you really sit with it in those dark hours, instead of fighting them, something profound happens. You start to hear the answer, and the answer is always specific. It's not vague, it's not mysterious. Your unconscious knows exactly what it's trying to tell you. You just have to be willing to listen. One of Jung's most important discoveries was that the unconscious speaks in symbols, not words. When you wake up at 3 a.m., your unconscious isn't going to give you a clear message like leave your job or end that relationship. Instead, it speaks in feelings, in images, in physical sensations, in the quality of your anxiety, and you have to learn to translate it. If you wake up with your heart racing, with a sense of impending doom, that's your unconscious saying there's danger here. Not physical danger, but psychological danger. You're living in a way that's threatening your authentic self. If you wake up with a heavy chest, feeling like you can't breathe, that's your unconscious saying something is suffocating you, something in your life is crushing your spirit, and you need space. If you wake up with nameless dread about the next day, that's your unconscious saying the life you're living doesn't fit who you are anymore. And facing another day of pretending is becoming unbearable. If you wake up with racing thoughts going over the same problem again and again, that's your unconscious trying to solve something, but it can't, because you're asking the wrong question. You're trying to fix the situation when what needs to change is you. Jung taught his patients to keep a journal by their bed, and when they woke at 3 a.m., instead of fighting it, to write, not to analyze, not to figure it out, but just to let the unconscious speak, to write whatever came stream of consciousness. No editing, no judgment, just let it flow. And what came out was always revealing, always showed the pattern, always pointed to what needed to change. One of his patients kept waking at 3 a.m. with intense anxiety. She'd lie there for hours, mind racing, unable to get back to sleep. Jung had her start journaling, and what came out night after night was rage. Rage at her husband, rage at her life, rage at the choices she'd made that led her here. But during the day, she was the perfect wife, never angry, never confrontational, always accommodating. Her persona was built on being nice, and her unconscious was waking her up every night to show her the truth. You're furious, and until you admit it, until you express it, until you honor it, you'll never sleep peacefully again. Within a week of starting to acknowledge her anger during the day, the wake-up stopped. Not because the marriage got better, but because she stopped lying to herself about how she felt. And that's the pattern Jung saw repeatedly. The wake-ups aren't about fixing your external life. They're about becoming honest with yourself about what you're really feeling, really wanting, really needing. And once you become honest, once you stop performing, once you let the unconscious material into consciousness, the wake-ups naturally resolve because they've served their purpose. Another patient woke every night at 4 a.m. with what he described as existential terror, like he was facing death itself. And in a way, Jung helped him see that he was facing the death of his old identity. He was a successful businessman, but he'd always wanted to be an artist. And at 45, he was finally admitting to himself that he'd chosen the wrong life. His unconscious was waking him up to grieve the artist he never became, to feel the terror of potentially changing course this late, to face the death of the successful businessman identity he'd built his whole life around. And once he understood what the terror was really about, once he started taking steps toward his true calling, even small ones, the wake-ups shifted. They became less frequent, less intense, and eventually stopped altogether, because his unconscious wasn't trying to torture him, it was trying to transform him. And once he started cooperating with the transformation, the alarm could turn off. This is what most people don't understand about these wake-ups. They're not the problem, they're the solution. Your psyche is trying to solve a problem that you won't solve consciously, so it has to solve it unconsciously. And it needs you awake to participate in the process. Jung called this active imagination, the practice of engaging with your unconscious material instead of just being a passive victim of it. And here's how you do it specifically, practically tonight. If you wake at 3 a.m., don't fight it. Don't reach for your phone. Don't try to force yourself back to sleep. Sit up, turn on a dim light, and ask your unconscious, what are you trying to tell me? Then write whatever comes. Don't filter it. Don't judge it. Don't try to make it make sense. Just let it flow and pay attention to the first thing that comes, because that's usually the truth. The thing you've been avoiding all day will be the first thing that appears at 3 a.m. Write it, feel it, acknowledge it. And here's the crucial part. Don't try to solve it at 3 a.m. Don't make any decisions. Don't figure out what to do. Just witness it. Just say, I see you. I hear you. I acknowledge this is true. Then thank your unconscious for trying to help you and go back to sleep. And in the morning, read what you wrote and notice how obvious it is. Notice how clearly your unconscious was speaking. Notice how you actually already knew this. You just weren't letting yourself know you knew. And then here's the part most people skip. Take one action that day that honors what your unconscious revealed. If it showed you you're angry at someone, have a conversation. If it showed you you're in the wrong career, research alternatives. If it showed you you're grieving something, let yourself cry. It doesn't have to be a big action, just one small step that says to your unconscious, I heard you and I'm responding, because that's what your psyche is waiting for. It's not waiting for you to fix everything overnight. It's just waiting for you to stop pretending, to stop avoiding, to acknowledge the truth and take one step in the direction of alignment. And when you do that, when you start cooperating with your unconscious instead of fighting it, something miraculous happens. The wake-ups change. They become less frantic, less panicked, less desperate, because your unconscious realizes you're finally listening. It doesn't have to scream anymore. It doesn't have to sound the alarm. You're awake, you're aware, you're taking action. And eventually, usually within days or weeks, the wake-ups stop naturally, effortlessly. Not because you fixed your sleep, but because you fixed the misalignment that was causing the wake-ups in the first place. And this is Jung's genius. He understood that symptoms are never just symptoms. They're always messages, and psychological symptoms especially are your psyche's way of communicating what your conscious mind refuses to hear. The wake-ups aren't happening to you. They're happening for you. They're not a curse. They're a gift, a painful gift, maybe an inconvenient gift, definitely, but a gift nonetheless, because they're showing you exactly where your life needs to change, and they won't stop showing you until you finally look. There's another layer to this that Jung discovered through his own experience. He went through a period where he woke every night at 3 a.m. terrified, convinced he was going insane. And instead of fighting it, he decided to explore it. He started engaging with the images and figures that appeared in his mind during these hours. And what he found became the foundation of his entire psychology. He discovered that there were autonomous figures in his unconscious archetypal energies that had their own intelligence, their own agendas, their own messages, and they were using these wake-up hours to communicate with him. One figure he called the old man kept appearing, telling him things he consciously didn't know, showing him insights about his patients, about himself, about the nature of the psyche. And Jung realized this wasn't random brain activity. This was his unconscious trying to teach him, trying to show him something his conscious mind couldn't access. And this is what's available to you in those 3 a.m. hours if you stop fighting them and start engaging with them. Your unconscious has information you don't have consciously. It sees patterns you can't see. It knows truths you're not ready to admit. It has access to what Jung called the collective unconscious, the deeper layer of psyche that holds universal human wisdom. And it's trying to give you that information, but it can't during the day when you're busy, when you're performing, when your ego is running the show. So it waits until 3 a.m. and then it downloads. And if you're willing to receive, if you're willing to engage, if you're willing to have a relationship with your unconscious instead of just being its victim, these wake-up hours become the most valuable hours of your day. They become your education, your therapy, your spiritual practice, all in one, because you're learning directly from the deepest part of yourself, the part that knows who you really are, what you really need, where you really need to go. Jung had patients who came to dread 3 a.m. and patients who came to cherish it, and the only difference was their relationship with their unconscious. The ones who fought it, who saw it as an enemy, who just wanted it to stop, suffered endlessly, but the ones who befriended it, who got curious about it, who started asking, what are you trying to teach me? They transformed. and their wake ups either stopped or became something entirely different. They became a practice, a ritual, a sacred time when they communicated with the deepest part of themselves. And many of them reported that even after the crisis passed, even after the message was delivered and integrated, they'd still occasionally wake at 3 a.m. and instead of fear, they'd feel gratitude because they knew their unconscious had something important to share, and they'd sit up and listen and receive whatever wisdom was trying to come through. This is the relationship with your unconscious that Jung spent his life developing and teaching, and it's available to you starting tonight. But it requires a fundamental shift. Instead of seeing these wake ups as something wrong, you have to see them as something right. Instead of seeing your unconscious as the enemy, you have to see it as your deepest ally. Instead of trying to silence it, you have to learn to listen. Because your unconscious isn't trying to torture you, it's trying to save you from a life that doesn't fit, from a version of yourself that isn't real, from choices that betray your authentic nature. And it will do whatever it takes to get your attention, including destroying your sleep night after night until you finally stop running and start listening. So tonight, if you wake at 3 a.m., try something different. Don't grab your phone. Don't count sheep. Don't take another pill. Sit up in the darkness, place your hand on your heart and say, what are you trying to tell me? And then listen, really listen, not with your ears, but with your whole being. And whatever comes, whether it's an image or a feeling or a knowing or a memory, don't judge it. Don't analyze it. Just receive it. And in the morning, take one action that honors it, one small step in the direction of truth. And watch what happens. Watch how your psyche responds. Watch how the quality of your wake-ups changes. Watch how over time your whole life begins to shift into alignment, because that's what your unconscious has been trying to do all along. Align your outer life with your inner truth, and it will keep waking you at 3 a.m. until that alignment happens, or until you die still pretending, still avoiding, still refusing to become who you actually are. The choice is yours, but your unconscious has already made its choice. It's chosen truth, it's chosen authenticity, it's chosen your real self over your false self, and it's willing to wake you up every single night for the rest of your life, if that's what it takes to force you to choose it too. Here's what Jung discovered that changes everything about how you understand these wake-ups. There's a specific pattern to them, and the pattern reveals exactly what your unconscious is working on. If you're waking at 3 a.m. on the dot every night, that's your unconscious saying there's one specific issue, one core wound, one central lie you're living that needs to be addressed. It's like a laser focused on the thing you most need to see if you're waking at different times between 3 and 5. That's your unconscious processing multiple layers of the same issue, working through different aspects of a transformation, trying to integrate various parts of yourself. If you wake suddenly with a jolt of adrenaline, that's your unconscious saying, this is urgent, this can't wait. You're in danger of betraying yourself completely. If you wake slowly, gradually, drifting up from dreams, that's your unconscious saying, I'm trying to show you something through these dreams. Pay attention to the symbols. If you wake and can't get back to sleep, that's your unconscious saying, you need to stay with this. You need to process this. Running back to unconsciousness isn't the answer right now. If you wake and fall back asleep quickly after acknowledging what's there, that's your unconscious saying, good, you heard me, that's all I needed. We can continue this tomorrow. Jung taught his patients to track these patterns, to notice what was different on nights when they slept through versus nights when they woke, to pay attention to what they'd been thinking about before bed, what they'd been avoiding during the day, what conversations they'd had that triggered something. And the patterns were always revealing the wake-ups, always correlated with days when they'd betrayed themselves somehow, when they'd said yes, when they meant no, when they'd stayed quiet, when they needed to speak, when they'd performed their persona instead of being their authentic self. The wake-ups were the bill coming due, the psyche saying, you can pretend during the day, but at 3 a.m. we deal with truth. One of Jung's patients was a woman who woke every single night at exactly 3:14 for months. They explored everything: her childhood, her relationships, her career. Nothing seemed to be the key until Jung asked her what's significant about 3:14, and she realized it was the time on the clock when she'd walked in and found her husband cheating 3 years earlier. She'd never fully processed it, never fully grieved it, never fully allowed herself to feel the rage and betrayal. She'd just moved forward. Did couples therapy try to save the marriage, perform forgiveness, but her unconscious knew the truth. She'd never actually forgiven him. She'd never actually dealt with the wound. She'd just put a bandage over it and gone back to sleep, literally and figuratively. And so every night at the exact moment of the original trauma, her unconscious woke her up and said, "We still need to deal with this. The wound is still open. We're still bleeding. And you're pretending we're fine." Once she understood this, once she finally allowed herself to feel what she'd been suppressing, the wake up stopped, not because the marriage got better, but because she got honest. And eventually she left not in anger, but in clarity. And she slept through the night for the first time in years because her unconscious wasn't trying to make her leave, it was just trying to make her honest. And once she was honest, the right action became obvious. This is what Jung meant when he said the psyche is self regulating. It's always trying to return to truth, to wholeness, to alignment, and it will use whatever means necessary, including destroying your sleep, to force you back into integrity. So if you're waking between 3 and 5 a.m., your psyche is regulating, it's correcting, it's trying to bring you back to center, back to truth, back to yourself. And the wake ups will continue until you let it, until you stop fighting the process and start cooperating with it. But here's what most people do instead: they medicate, they distract, they try every sleep hack and supplement and technique to stop the wake ups. And all of that is just another form of resistance, another way of saying, I don't want to hear what you're trying to tell me. I don't want to change. I don't want to face the truth. Just let me sleep. Let me stay unconscious. Let me keep pretending. And your unconscious says, no, not anymore. The time for pretending is over. You're ready for this, whether you think you are or not. And I'm going to keep waking you up until you deal with it, because Jung understood something crucial. Your unconscious knows things your conscious mind doesn't. It knows when you're ready for a change, even when you think you're not. It knows when a chapter of your life is ending, even when you're desperately trying to hold on. It knows who you really are, even when you've forgotten. And it will always, always move you toward that truth, toward that next chapter, toward that real self. And sometimes gently through dreams and intuitions and quiet knowing, but sometimes forcefully through symptoms and wake ups and breakdowns when the gentle way hasn't worked, when you've been ignoring the whispers and it has to shout. And the 3 a.m. wake ups are the shout. They're your unconscious saying, I tried to tell you quietly and you didn't listen. So now I'm going to make sure you hear me. I'm going to wake you up every single night until you finally pay attention, until you finally stop running, until you finally face what needs to be faced. And here's the beautiful thing. Once you stop fighting and start listening, once you ask, what are you trying to tell me? And actually wait for the answer, everything shifts. The wake ups might continue for a while because there's processing to do, there's integration to happen, there's action to take, but they stop being torture and start being communion. They stop being something that happens to you and start being something you engage with. And eventually, when the message is delivered, when the change is made, when you've aligned your life with your truth, the wake ups naturally stop, not because you conquered them, but because they served their purpose. They woke you up, not just from sleep, but from the trance of your false life, from the dream of being someone you're not, from the illusion that you can betray yourself without consequence. And that's the real awakening. That's what your unconscious has been trying to give you all along. Not better sleep, but a more authentic life, not a way to stop waking at 3 a.m., but a way to stop sleepwalking through your entire existence. And once you understand that, once you receive that gift, you'll look back on these wake ups, not with resentment, but with gratitude, because they were the thing that finally forced you to listen to change, to become who you actually are. So tonight, when you wake at 3 a.m., and you will, now that you're paying attention, don't curse it, don't fight it, don't reach for your phone to distract yourself, sit up in the darkness, take a deep breath and say, "Thank you. Thank you for trying to wake me up. Thank you for refusing to let me keep sleepwalking. Thank you for loving me enough to disturb my sleep until I finally listen." And then ask, "What do I need to know?" And listen, really listen, because your unconscious has been trying to tell you something. And tonight you're finally ready to hear it.